you.
Got it, California.
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
California's in the house. All right. Welcome, everyone. And thank you so much for joining us for WBEC-East's 2023 Legal Series. We are here tonight for a really special topic, and that's around how to hire your first employee. My name is Joyce Kadeska. I'm the Women's Business Center Director at WBEC-East. I have some fantastic people to introduce, but before I do that, I will let you know that this is the third and final session of the series. Today, as I mentioned, we're talking about how to hire your first employees. But if you missed it, our first session 2 weeks ago was covering your legal basis. Last week, we talked about so you want to get your LLC and how to do that. And today, we're going to focus on more the employment side of things and focusing on how to hire your first employees. A bit about WBEC-East. WBEC-East is a nonprofit founded in 1995 that supports women entrepreneurs who are starting and growing their business. Our goal is to promote and support economic self-sufficiency for women entrepreneurs, and we do that by providing workshops such as this one, courses around business planning and business fundamentals, one-on-one counseling with our fantastic business counselor that we have here, Melanie McLeod, in addition to on-demand self-paced courses through ed2go.com that are really low cost and at your own speed. We'll be providing a bunch of links in the chat at the end, in addition to a follow-up email. So I won't give you all the information right now, but I did want to share that we are very excited at WBEC-East to be able to provide this session to you. We are funded in part by the U.S. Small Business Administration and the Women's Business Enterprise National Council. So without further ado, I wanted to make some introductions today. So today we have three specialists, three attorneys who are really here to help you talk about how to hire your first employee. First, we have Renee Lear, Chair of the Employee Benefits and Executive Compensation Group at McNeese Law. We have Marsha O'Connor, Founder and CEO of the O'Connor Group. And we have Tracy Flint, who is the CEO and Principal Consultant for Heart for HR LLC. I am joined by my colleague, Elliot Gilkison, the program coordinator here at WBEC-East, who will be moderating the discussion, and Melanie McLeod, our outsourced business consultant and facilitator for our key courses on business planning and a bunch of other things that you will hear about later today. All right. So without further ado, I'm going to actually pass it on all over to Elliot. Before I do that, I would like to read a disclaimer.
Yes.
And the disclaimer says that no liability is assumed with respect to the use of information presented in this session. The information is intended for educational purposes only and should not be considered as providing legal advice. Laws may be amended and court rulings made that could affect a particular procedure, issue, or interpretation that may be included in the session. None of the professionals on this call, authors, or instructors assume responsibility for the errors or omission, nor any liability for damages resulting from the use of information contained in this call. Please contact your local solicitor or attorney for legal advice. So I'm going to pass it on over to Elliot to kick us off in moderating this panel. Take it away, Elliot.
All right. So to get started and just covering basic, legal questions, what are some key legal requirements for entrepreneurs to be aware of who are hiring their first employees? This is open to the panel.
One thing I will add, and I won't jump in from here on in, is as you answer this question, if you don't mind telling us a bit about who you are and what you do for your particular organization.
Well, I can start, and I'm Marsha O'Connor, guys. Just to let you know, I'm not a lawyer, but that's okay. I love being known that. I actually have an accounting background, so it's a little bit different. I have more of the business side of the house, and so I have my colleagues here to talk about the legal side of the house. I think the biggest thing for me when I hired my first person, I waited 3 years when I started my company to hire my first full-time person. It was more so of making sure that you could actually pay the employer taxes and pay all of that and make sure you have enough money coming in through whatever you're selling and all your that's product or service to make sure that you can afford it, because a W-2 is very different versus the 1099. So those are the biggest things that I was thinking of when I actually hired my first full-time person.
Thanks, Marcia. Tracy or Renee?
I'm Tracy. I am the CEO and principal consultant at Heart for HR, which is a small HR consulting firm. And one of the key legal requirements I say is to make sure that you have your EIN number so that you can pay your taxes for your business, and also make sure that you register with the state that you're hiring that employee in, to make sure that you have your state and local taxes and unemployment tax IDs, and also workers' comp and disability insurance requirements if necessary.
Renee?
Yes. I'm Renee Lear, and I am in the McNeese Law Employment and Labor Group, but my specialty is employee benefits, ERISA, executive comp, and things of that nature. And I actually have like 2 pages of requirements that you guys have. But to boil it down, because I know we don't have an hour to talk about this one topic, is that each state and the federal government have requirements that you have to post certain posters and provide certain information to your employees, and it's about their wages. I know Delaware has like a poster that it's a consolidated laws poster that you have to put up. So does Pennsylvania, based upon wage payment. So that's one of the things. Make sure you have all of the notices that are required to be posted, and all the ones that you actually have to hand your employees, make sure you have them out as well. And as Tracy indicated, you know, there's a laundry list of forms you have to fill out. Like there's I-9s with employees proving that they're allowed to work in the US. And that's a big one if you don't fill it out and you get caught. There's also all of the tax forms, like there's W-4s that employees have to fill out. You want to create personnel files for your employees. You want to make sure that you have a personnel file that's for general information, and then a personnel file where you keep their medical information and the I-9s and the W-4s, because that's, you know, super confidential information. But essentially that's it. You want to make sure that you provide them all of the legally required notices, and that and all of the legally required documentation that you have to get from them and that you have to provide them.
So I got a funny story to share on that one. So those forms, the legal posters that you had, I totally get that. And listen, you're going to get tons of forms of people saying you need all this documentation. It's really simple stuff. Don't fall for it. It's more expensive out there. It's super simple. Just have to Google it, the update. I actually had a client that I couldn't find their legal stuff, and I opened up the cupboard in the kitchen, and they're hanging in the kitchen cupboard. And I said, okay, don't put it in there. They have to be seen. If you get audited, they actually have to be seen out there. And she's like, well, we had no place to put them. I said, I get that. I said, but I don't care if it's like behind this door here. It is not in the cupboard. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Okay,
on the cupboard, not in the cupboard.
Yeah, it was in the cupboard. Yeah.
And she's absolutely correct. There's a lot of companies that will try to sell you all of these forms. You don't actually have to buy them from them. I mean, you can go on the governmental website. Delaware has a link where you can hit a button and you can print it yourself. So does Pennsylvania. I know, so does New Jersey. So you don't have to spend hundreds of dollars for these postings. You can get it from the government
for free.
And also how Marcia talked about having them in a conspicuous place so that you can be seen. And for those who are remote, what I like to do is upload them into a shared folder or whatever to make them accessible to your employees if you are more of a remote company.
Right.
And make sure that if you have employees in different states, make sure you have all those states available to the employees to be accessed.
Right. And I completely agree. If you're a business in Pennsylvania, but you have somebody working remote full time in New York and they never come, even if they do come in Pennsylvania, they spend the majority and actually, I don't even think it has to be the majority of their time in New York. But they work from New York. You have to provide them the New York posters and information as well as Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and don't be cheap, guys. Try to get basically a payroll company to do the taxes of your people as well as yourself as soon as you can, because you have to file them quarterly, and 941s are a pain in the neck, and it's the last thing you want to think about. So I know that you think you can't afford it, but seriously, you can't afford the fines that come along with it when you don't do that. So really, really make sure that you outsource the things that you're not good at. Okay.
And not only the fines, you can't afford the 2 hours that it's going to take you, and the stress and the aggravation on trying to fill out a form that's a tax related form.
Yep.
And doing the math.
Yep. Yeah, that's the only thing I was going to add is just, it might cost you some money, but think about the time and energy it is saving you from getting in the weeds of all of those tax documents. Great. Thank you so much, y'all. Okay, so this one, anyone can feel free to chime in, but I think Tracy and Marcia will have the most to offer. From an administrative standpoint, what are some key resources a business owner should be aware of and have in their back pocket when hiring employees?
Well, I will start off and say that one of the main resources, one of them, Renee has spoke about this, is making sure that the employee you hire is eligible to work in the United States by having them fill out an I-9 form and showing their proof documents that they are citizens of the United States or permanent residents or whatever their category is. Also, I would
What
say,
is where can people who are first hiring or hiring their first employees access forms like the I-9 and the W-4 to print out for their hires?
you can basically go on the Department of Labor, or you can Google it. It'll come up that, those forms, just make sure that you have your most updated form available. But
And be
yeah, you
careful
can
when you go
also,
online. I'm sorry,
yeah,
Tracy,
yeah,
because what happens is the ads come up first, the
Mhm.
sponsored ads,
yes.
and a lot of people get pulled. And what happens is you get pulled into it and you have to pay all this money. All those forms are free. So make
Yes.
sure it's truly .gov. Okay, sorry, Tracy.
Yeah. And the other form that I said that I wanted to mention too is, like you said, Elliot, the W-4 form. It's important that every employee fill out a W-4 form so that they know, so the employer will know what payroll taxes to withhold from that particular employee.
And on that, make sure they understand what a W-4 employee, what that means in regards to their taxes at year end. We find that a lot of them don't do enough of withdrawals during the course of the year because they don't understand it. So make sure that they understand it. There's actually great YouTube tutorials out there about what a W-4 means and how it affects your paycheck, as well as year-end taxes. Okay, very important.
Mhm. Yeah. Anything else to add, Renee?
Yeah.
Resource-wise?
So this has been brought up, but I'll bring it up again. The government websites, like you can get the majority of the information that you need from the government website. And I know a lot of them are kind of hard. Sometimes you might think that they're hard to navigate. There's usually a contact number. And I know the last thing that you would want to do is pick up the phone and call the government and ask them a question, but you can. And typically you'll find somebody who will help you out and who will say, oh, you can't find that form. This is where you find it. Or, you don't have this. This is what you need. So I would definitely utilize the government websites. I would utilize law firm and consultant websites, because a lot of times there's blogs or there's email blast. And I know McNeese has a Pennsylvania labor and employment blog, to where when new things happen, it sends out like an email to everybody with like, here's a change in the law, or here's something that you need to do. And I know we do like compliance things in this organization. I think that people have a resource with this organization to be able to, when they, have questions or need help.
And I also saw that someone provided in the chat a very useful link to the USCIS. That is, you can definitely get the W-9, I-9 from there, and you will get the most updated one, and it gives you an explanation of each section of the I-9 and all that stuff. So that is the most important link to go to if you need to know more about the I-9 forms and how to get them.
And the I-9 just got updated again too. They had the regulations with the I-9 because it was a little bit easier doing with COVID. It was hard to validate people's stuff, and now they're making it back to being hard again. And so make sure you really understand the I-9 and how to complete it properly and keep it separate, like Renee had mentioned. Very important.
Mhm. Cool. Anything else on the topic? All right. So Marcia, you had mentioned this before briefly, but can any one of you or all of you elaborate on what is the difference between an independent contractor and an employee, and what are the different legal implications of each for an entrepreneur to hire?
Yeah, I would say, my very first 3 years of business, I did a lot of 1099 consultants. In the consultant 1099, meaning they have to pay their own taxes, but they should also have their own insurance. And you're going to have to require a W-9 from them that shows that. And they usually have at least one other client as well. Because what's going to happen if you've had a consultant for 3 years, working 40 hours for you, doing the same thing for 3 years and all too, they're going to be like, looks like an employee, smells like an employee, it's an employee. And they're going to basically whack you for basically, all the employer taxes that you haven't paid in 3 years. So you have to be very, very cautious about that. And so the 1099 is very different. Just make sure, I always make sure that they had insurance, and I always made sure they had at least one other client to make sure it was all cohesive. But you can have a consultant for a little bit while you come on board. I just tell people over a year, just be very careful about that, because there are people that I know their whole business was set up on 1099s. And I said, aren't you afraid of getting caught? They're like, I get caught, it'd be no big deal. I'm like, ugh. To me, that's a very expensive proposition. And so I always made sure, like after 3 years, I had the W-9s. I made sure they had one client, and then I moved my team over into W-2s back about 3 years later into my practice.
So,
Big difference.
And to follow up on that, on the getting caught, so this comes into play with two different government regulators. One is the IRS, and the other one is the Department of Labor. The Department of Labor looks at it from the perspective of were you paying these individuals minimum wage, and were you paying them overtime when they worked overtime if they didn't fall within an exemption. So if you have an employee that's been working for you for a couple of years and you're classifying them as an independent contractor, and you're not really keeping track of the amount of time that they work because you just pay them a flat fee, and they complain to the Department of Labor, then you may owe them overtime and back wages, and that's your Department of Labor issue. Then, as Marcia already said, you have an IRS issue, because the IRS is going to come in. They're going to say, where are all the back taxes that you owe? And then they're going to penalize you for it. And the DOL and the IRS have similar tests on determining whether or not somebody is an independent contractor. The DOL is updating its rules, and not, it's interesting because it's updating its rules to go back to the old rules that it had, and it's essentially, it looks at like the totality of the circumstances, as was previously mentioned. It's like, do they have other clients? The IRS and the DOL will look at who controls the employee. Like, does the employee control the employee's own work and on time that they're going to work and how they're going to reduce this, or is the employer doing that? And if the employer is saying you have to work 40 hours a week and this is what you have to do during the 40 hours a week, you're not going to win the test. You're not going to win that argument.
I'll tell you a funny story, another story I'll tell you guys. I had a client and decided to bring his wife in, do HR, and he said, listen, my wife can fix it. She can do anything. I'm going to put her do HR. And I said, I highly recommend you don't do that. He's like, nope, I'm good. He's like, no problem. So one of his side, he had another satellite office in New Jersey, had gotten basically, saying, hey, we're going to come in and do an audit on your I-9s. Well, the guy totally disregarded it and said, oh, no big deal. Well, because he disregarded it, they said, oh, okay, well, we're going to go back to the corporate headquarters in Philadelphia. We're going to do an audit on the entire thing. So we ended up doing an audit. They come in to find out like half of their I-9s were not completely filled out right, because she never had training and she really didn't know what she was doing. And he was trying to do the cheap way. And lo and behold, when she was talking to the attorney that was involved with it, and all the immigration attorney, and she's like, was there any other registers we need to know about? And she said to him, well, yeah. She goes, well, this is the register. Do you want to see the checkbook? And he said, what checkbook? And lo and behold, that there were 10 people that were paying for 10 years, salaries over 100K, that basically were not on the payroll register, that basically were paying no employer taxes, and they were just getting a check. They were not 1099s. They were basically as W-2
Freebies.
freebies, and they had gotten a pretty significant fine because of that, because she specifically didn't even know, but she said she just spilled the beans. And then, he called me 6 months later. He's like, I probably think I need you guys. And I'm like, yeah, I think you do. And but there's just things to think about. Don't go cheap on things like this, guys. Okay. True
Yeah,
story.
I also want to make one comment too. I had a client one time was telling me about this woman that worked for her, and her employee evaluation, and she's going through all this, and I'm going, wait a minute, I thought you didn't have any employees, you have only 1099. She says, I do. And I go, then why are you doing employee evaluations? Oh, I always do employee evaluations. No, employee evaluations are not done on 1099s. So there's a lot of things that people don't realize.
Yes. And like I said, and to piggyback on what all three of you have said, Renee, you had mentioned about the tests that they have to determine when auditors come in to determine the difference between an independent contractor and an employee. And the top 6 of them is the amount of control that you have over that employee, whether you're directing them, what to do, how to do it, when to do it, and all that. The actual job duties is one, the associated costs to that particular employee, the payroll taxes, which is the number is the top on the list, employee benefits, and the cultural impact of the employee. So those are 6 things that you can basically determine whether you're using this person as an employee or a 1099, and how you can go about fixing that.
Tracy, can you elaborate on that last point about the cultural implication of the worker?
If you have your culture, depending on how you treat your employees, the benefits that you give to your employees, how you develop your employees, and things of that nature. So if you have 1099s, they're not really bought into the culture. They're not, they don't really worry about the culture of your business. They just there to do a project or do a job and keep it moving. So that's how it can impact your culture.
So like a 1099, you're not going to give a 1099 contractor your like employee handbook that lays out your whole company practice and everything. Okay.
Correct.
Thanks for that clarification.
But you got to make sure they're doing things according to your, your policies and processes and things of that nature.
And so something like that, how would you create that agreement? Would that be a separate contract you draw up?
Yeah, that could definitely be entered into the contract that you have with the agreement that you have with that particular 1099.
And you should have an agreement with your independent contractors. I mean, because in the agreement, you need to say you're an independent contractor, you're responsible for the taxes. And it's not that if if the IRS and DOL come in and you say, oh, but we have an agreement, that's not going to win the argument, but it's going to help you. Because it's like, no, we've agreed. And then the employee it's harder for the employee to go back and say, well, I thought I was an employee and I didn't realize they weren't taking out taxes and things of that nature.
And in my agreements, it definitely says you are a consultant and not an employee, to make sure that it's not misunderstood if it ever came down to that.
Yeah, put it in the simplest terms possible.
Yes.
And make sure too in that, because if you're working and they have clients in there and all too, make sure that's in there, the 1099, that they won't steal your client. So you want to make sure that they don't solicit that client and they can't do business with that client for at least a year. A lot of people forget that. And because what happens is that person gets very comfortable with that client, they will leave you because now they basically have that new revenue on their own. And you have to make sure that that is signed and sealed by that. Make sure that you can go back and say, you can't touch my client. Don't forget that.
And if you do,
very important clause.
There's a big cost if you do.
Exactly. Yep.
Any other key differences between independent contractors and employees, and the implications for those who are hiring the two?
you got to keep in mind that with the 1099, they're always looking for the next thing. Okay, so it's really hard to get that in. And when I pushed everybody to a W-2, I felt like they were part of the team now. They were all like, we're all working together. 1099 is always thinking about what's their next meal going to be. So keep that in mind.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, I know it's a pretty hot topic right now. Thinking about 1099s as like the gig workers of the economy, right? Sorry, Renee, you were going to say something
so,
before I
so I was
interrupted.
going to say, you can prohibit a 1099, an independent contractor, from taking your employees or working with your employee, not sorry, your client after they leave. And you can also prevent them from stealing your employees, but you can't have a non-compete. You know, I have a lot of clients who are like, we have independent contractors and we want a non-compete with them. And it's like, well, when you're telling them you can't work for someone else, you're turning them into an employee when they don't have to be an employee. And that is one of the things that goes to the control, like you're controlling who they can work for and when they can work for them.
Good point.
And another point that I wanted to make is I had clients, for example, they did landscaping and they hired all 1099s to cut their clients' lawns and do those things. And that was great until she started getting really, really busy. And then she would say, hey, I've got a client I need done up. I can't do it that day. I can't do it until I'm busy, because they were 1099, so they were getting busy too. And so she started running into a problem of being able to service her clients. And at that point, she had to really sit down and think about, is it time now to actually have employees, because I need to have control over their schedules or I can't service my clients.
Exactly. That is a fantastic point.
That is definitely a sign of you need to hire somebody. You hire your employee.
If the work is there and you need to meet it. All right, thank you so much. Okay, so moving on, when we think more about the finance side of everything, what are some critical conditions an entrepreneur must keep in mind regarding employment and employer taxes, insurance, payroll and compensation, and then workers' comp and benefits? And this is obviously open to all three of you because you all seem very well versed in all of the admin background side.
Well, I would say first thing is for employers, new employees, to understand the financial health of your company, understand your P&Ls, and get familiar with the finances, the health of your company, in order to be able to budget for those things, for the benefits and the comp and all those things like that, and to maintain your a healthy profit margin. So just knowing your numbers is very important, and making sure that you are, in touch, and making sure that you can afford those things that you need to retain your employees.
Yep, I would agree with that. Absolutely. You want to make sure you have that. Being accountants and all too, I actually outsourced my books as well. It was really hard for me to do that, but I did do it. It was really the right move. But you have to understand that, I don't know, but my world is professional services. So we didn't get paid for 3 months. And long time ago, when I started in 2007, I would actually have in my contract for my 1099s that I couldn't pay you until I got paid. And at that time, they were fine with it, because we all know 2008, I just want to forget that year of my life. But it was tough for a lot of people with money and cash. I think nowadays they look at you like you're crazy, but you have to make sure that you always have that money. And you have to make sure that you have money for employer taxes and for insurance. I didn't provide medical benefits for my team guys for 7 years after I started. 7. And I said, people just took a risk with me. They said they believe in you, where you're going with this, and yada, yada. But you always, the rule of thumb with benefits is you can always add to them, but it's really hard to take away. So you want to make sure that you can afford it. And I would say start as soon as you possibly can afford it, because it's only going to get higher. And you want to make sure that you always incorporate that. It's usually the second cost after your payroll. Okay. So these are the things you want to make sure that you do, but just make sure that you constantly, I put everything I had, I bootstrapped the entire thing right back into the company. I just said, what's the smallest amount I need to survive, and blah, blah, blah. I just put it back into the company, guys, but figure out the budget, work with an accountant that really gives you you should have live data. The systems are so inexpensive right now. There's no reason why you can't go into your phone, go into that system and see exactly what you have in your savings in regards to, how much for your payables are, how much your receivables are. That should be at your fingertips. And someone tells you that I can't get that done for like a month, find a new accountant because you can do that nowadays.
And that's a very good point you said, Marcia, is to make sure start low
Mhm.
with the benefits and things that you want to provide, because like you said, it's harder to take away than it is to add.
Right. And I think most employers start with just providing like PTO, like paid time off. Health insurance is unbelievably expensive, and you're not required to provide health insurance until you have like 50. It's the full-time equivalent. So you can, if you have 100 part-time employees that work the equivalent of 50 full-time employees, then that's when you would be required to provide health insurance. But there's other things that you can do, other benefits that you can provide instead of health insurance. It's, and actually, and I hate this, that the way they call this, but it's called the ICHRA. It's the abbreviations are ICHRA. It's an individual coverage HRA. So you could create an account for your employees and say, okay, I'm going to fund $25 per month for you to use towards finding health insurance on the open market. So you don't have to go all in and say, we're going to spend, I think it's like $800 a month now to get coverage for an employee. You can say, we're going to do 25. This is where we're going to start. And then you can add on to that when it becomes more reasonable. But I completely agree. Benefits are unbelievably expensive. And it's not only the actual cost of the benefits, it's the cost of the administration. There's a reason why I have a job. Like my job again is to fix mistakes in benefit plans. So take small steps to get there.
Mhm.
And like you said, you can add like with the ICHRA, because I have a few clients that are on that, and you can just start off small, like you said. Just say, I'm gonna give $100 towards whatever plan you pick. At least you're giving something to the employee to help them with that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's definitely something that I think every entrepreneur who is on this journey for themselves wants to be able to improve the lives of those who are working with them, right? So I think that's a really great point of how, incremental and slow-paced and mindful putting together those benefits are. So what kind of employment and employer taxes are people looking at for their employees when they have employees?
Go ahead, Renee.
Look at income taxes, unemployment taxes, social security taxes, Medicare taxes, all kinds of taxes.
Yes. And
You
then
know how it is. You
yes.
pay all these, you see all these taxes coming out of your check every day. That's the taxes that, we have to make sure that we withhold from employees and make sure that we pay. And like the social security and Medicare taxes and all comes from both the employee and the employer portion. So you have to make sure that those things are paid.
And if you're in a state like New York, New Jersey, and I'm pretty sure California, they have paid family medical leaves and paid disability leaves that they're actually taxes to the employees that you have to withhold and remit to the state government. And if you don't, then the state government, it's a penalty upon you. So there is a laundry list of taxes that you have to withhold, and as Tracy indicated, there's employer side taxes that you have to pay as well.
So there are taxes that you won't even know that there are taxes for. So I was doing my business. I was in it for 5 years. I won a Philly 100 award. We're so excited about it. I would go to the awards, see yourself in the paper, boom, excited. Out of the blue, I get to some collections agency saying, you owe us money for Philadelphia business privilege tax. Okay, out of nowhere. And I'm like, what? I didn't even know Philadelphia had a tax like this. And lo and behold, it was 5 years of doing business in Philadelphia. And apparently there's a tax on the revenues coming in from that we had to pay for. So I called my accountant up. I'm like, where you been? Like, been working with you for 5 years, never knew about this tax, and now we're getting paid. He's like, wait a minute, I'll get rid of the penalties and interest. I'm like, that's the least you can do. And when that all said and done, bye-bye. I got a new
I'm about to
account.
say, is this the same one you left, or is this the
No, girl,
same?
no way. And I said, absolutely not. And I know you fixed it, but too late. And but I said, it shouldn't have to find out by having my name all over the paper. And I literally didn't try, didn't apply for Philly 100 for like 5 years. I was so mad. And but these are the things you learn. And I wish be around people like this, be around like WBEC, East, because they're the ones that are going to tell you the things that you need to know. And it was stuff like that that I wish I had this in my life a lot sooner. I would have basically not had to pay, wonderful bill like that. But it was it was $7,000. I was only 5 years in, and that's a lot of money back then that you didn't realize you're gonna have to pay,
Right.
and so I was fuming. And so make sure, because each place you go, every state, every city, every local area has their own piece of the share, basically. Okay. So be really careful, work with a really good accountant, work with a really good payroll group to make sure everything's taken out, because if not, they look at you as like it's the employer's fault if it doesn't happen. So be very careful about that.
Right.
And make sure your payroll system, your HRS system, or whatever payroll system that you use are familiar with those taxes as well.
Right. And from the employee and not the employer side, like where I live, like there's federal taxes, there's state taxes, there's local taxes, and then I'm in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. So I actually pay a flat fee tax to Harrisburg just to drive into Harrisburg and work here.
Philly
Um,
has a same tax, the same kind of tax.
Yeah,
non-resident.
and for me, I live in Montgomery County. So when
Mhm.
I was going into Philly before the pandemic, I had to pay a tax. But now that I'm doing everything on Zoom in Montgomery County, I don't have to pay Philadelphia anymore.
Right.
Crazy.
That's the non-resident tax. Yes,
Mm-hmm.
so much.
Yeah.
But then,
This-
All right.
but going back to the cost of an employee, I
Mhm.
mean, like then there's insurance other than health insurance. I mean,
Right.
you definitely want to have employer practices insurance, because that's the insurance that's going to cover you if an employee is if there's an allegation of like some type of discrimination or harassment by, and it may not even be by the employer, it could be by a client. If an employee sues the employer because a client said something inappropriate, then you would want this insurance to cover you on that. So I would definitely recommend looking into that when you hire an employee.
Yep, I agree.
Yeah. Any other, maybe Tracy, since you're in the HR background, any other insurances that people should be considering when hiring employees?
It also depends on your industry as well, so if you have IT company, or if you have some type of, SaaS software company or whatever, you want to make sure that you have the cyber insurance and things, the error and omissions and stuff like that. So, but that's about it. That most of the insurances, your general liability, your professional liabilities insurance, as well as your your different EPLI, the employment liability insurance. Those are the main insurances to have to cover your business. And some people will have director's insurance, like if something happened to the CEO and they can no longer do the job or whatever, they got insurance to cover the payrolls and things of that nature. So those type of things. I mean, they have insurance for everything. So whatever you need covered, right, Renee?
Right.
So yeah.
And don't forget, each state has its own unemployment insurance too. So
Yes.
usually, I know every state I have a remote employee, I actually have basically registered as an entity in that state to make sure that I'm compliant with that. And then we get information about unemployment insurance and we have to pay that too. So every state is different. Just make sure you're working with the right person that understands all that. Very important.
Yeah. And
And,
there are five specific states that require you to have disability insurance. So make sure that if you're in any of those states, which is California, Hawaii, New York, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and I think Puerto Rico. So those places you are required to have disability insurance.
Crazy.
And circling back to the taxes, bringing it up with the disability insurance. If you're a Pennsylvania company and you have a New York employee who's working remotely in New York, then you have to figure out which tax to withhold. New York wants their tax. And the question is Pennsylvania going to require you to withhold taxes as well? And it gets very complicated, and it's based upon where the work comes from, how frequently the employee comes back into Pennsylvania. So that's something that you would definitely want to reach out to. And again, hire a payroll provider to make sure that you're complying with that.
Thank you for that, all of you. As people are looking to hire their first employees, can you all share some best practices or best resources, or both, I guess, for recruiting first employees and how that onboarding process works?
I would say, first to determine if you can afford to hire. That's number one. Create a job description that detail the roles and responsibility for that job, so you can see if you need to hire someone full-time, if you need to hire someone part-time, and make sure you classify the position appropriately, meaning making sure if it's an exempt or non-exempt. I would say also determine the salary for the job. Make sure if it's a salary or hourly position, those are things you need to consider. Consider if there's going to be any benefits offered, as we discussed earlier. Also, I say when you plan on recruiting, which I find a lot, this is one of my pet peeves in recruiting. When you're recruiting and interviewing employees for a role or whatever, I say be intentional in the review. I mean, in recruiting and interview, meaning like don't leave a large gap of time between you interviewing that employee and then showing interest in bringing them on or whatever, and they waiting around for someone to say if they have the job or not. And also, don't have them have to interview with every person in the company. That's another thing that is really makes a person not really want to take the job if they have to interview with 20 different people. I would plan to do a panel interview if you want to, with the key people of the company that they need to hire, that needs to talk to this person. So I would say, just be careful when hiring an employee that's not having them waiting out there too long and having to meet with everybody in the company. Those are, I would say, the best practices I have for recruiting your first employee.
Thank you, Tracy. Marsha or Renee?
Well, half my business is recruiting. So we're an outsourced recruiting and outsourced HR company. So I would say recruiting, I agree with that, Tracy, there. Don't wait long. They're not going to wait for that answer anymore. The good ones go really fast. It's about the networking. It's about who they know. I do think LinkedIn still works. 95% of recruiters are going in LinkedIn basically and posting those positions. It is expensive, but it is the best farthest reach. I know Indeed works as well. The problem with that is you want to make sure that you have somebody reviewing all those resumes, because right now a lot of people on the market, so that means a lot of resumes to review, and that's a lot of time off of you, and you're already busy. So be really careful when you're ready to go for that. Really put it out there. A job description is a must. What I tell people is that don't get too specific in a job description. I would say be more generic sometimes, because they've gotten, depending what age, it has gotten very strange out there. Like, well, that job description didn't say that, so I shouldn't be doing that. And you know what? And when you're growing, you need people that are going to pull up the sleeves, get dirty, be okay taking the trash out, be okay basically washing that sink if it's dirty, and doing their job. So you have to make sure, you want to make sure you ask those kind of questions to them about, give me experiences and what examples and how did you do this, and going through, do you like solving puzzles? You have to really dig deep in that, but be very, like I would say, my rule is always 3. I don't try to do more than 3 people interviewing. I think nowadays and all too, like, you know what you want, you have to go out there. But like I also said, follow your gut. I'm a big gut person. I feel as if it's people don't do that enough. And I said lots of times my team was like, I'm gonna go with this person, we need to fill, and my gut wasn't there. And I'm like, oh, okay. 6 months later, it was my
Yeah.
problem. So don't do that, okay? And follow your gut. But also, when I first started, I was really clear with that person. And I said, listen, it's an at-will state, meaning that, you know, in 3 months, we're going to basically have a heart to heart. And if you're not happy, no harm, no foul. If I'm not happy, no harm, no foul. We're going to basically just call it quits there. I said, because I want to make sure that I have the best person for this. This is new for me. I'm just as nervous as you are. You're taking a risk with me and vice versa. And so let's work on this together. And my very first person, I talked to her every day for an hour. And she was in Arizona and I was in Pennsylvania. And we made it work, kind of a thing, but we took a lot of time to do all that. And we got to each other's groove and we understood what was happening. She's still with me to this day and she's now in Nevada, but ironically enough, you got to put that time and effort into it, because most of the time people are like, well, I don't have time to go over things with you. That doesn't work. You have to really work with them to make sure they're actually understanding what you want to get out of them. So it's very important that, you know, when you get a new hire, spend the time with them, be very clear, make sure the time frame is there, and make sure in about 90 days that you go through, is this the person that really want? Because if it's not, you're only going to get angry at yourself because you didn't make that decision sooner. Okay.
Renee?
Yeah, so this question for me was a little difficult because my first initial thought when I read it was, excuse me, hire a recruiter, hire somebody to do it for you. That's the best thing you can do. That would be for me. But I get that sometimes that's not always possible. So I actually contacted a recruiter and I talked to a couple of business owners. The one thing that I heard back was that use your networks. Like, use the people that you know to see if they know of anybody who may be interested in the job. And also to come up with a why somebody should work for your company. Because of the current job market, I think a lot of people are having difficulty finding employees, and so you need to convince people to come work for you. That, you know, the person that you find that you like. And as Tracy said, don't have them interview in front of 20 people, because they're not going to want to work for you. But you also have to sell your company in finding this right person. And the other thing that, and because we do a lot of M&A, and so I review a lot of the job descriptions after they're done and after they're used. And a lot of times I look at them and I'm like, ooh, eek, you can't put that in a job description. A lot of people are honest in their job descriptions, but you should have a consultant or an attorney like review it to make sure that it's not coming off as being discriminatory. And it could come off as discriminatory against, you know, gender, against age, against race. So just double check to make sure that it's, you know, they're legally compliant.
Great. Anything else on recruiting or where people should kind of look to do that? So we got LinkedIn, Indeed, networks, personal and professional networks. Anything else? Melanie, do you have anything to offer?
Gotta get me out. I'm off of mute. Okay. So sometimes there are, if you belong to an industry, a trade association, you can use your trade associations as a good contact point. There are a lot of organizations that, you know, your industry may be involved with, and, you know, like nurses and things like that. There are organizations, and you can advertise through those organizations sometimes, and that allows you to get access to higher quality people sometimes.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And colleges and universities, you know, building
Yep.
relationships with the career services department. So those can help you bring in some good people as well.
Absolutely. And the other thing too is sometimes you can offer internships to college students that are, you know, seniors in college. And sometimes you may get a really good person. And then when they graduate, you can hire them. You already know
Mhm.
they're already tested. So I like that as an option as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and keep in mind, a lot of people have gotten laid off. A lot of really good people have gotten laid off. So you're going to see a lot more people to choose from September, October, November this fall. So it's a great opportunity to hire some really good people right now without
Mhm.
breaking the bank kind of a deal because they're looking for a job. So keep that in mind as well. Okay.
Yeah. Perfect.
And
Thank you,
if you
Marcia.
and if you're not hiring them, just network with them. Keep in touch with them just in
Mhm.
case when you're ready.
Yeah.
And the other thing that's really important too is, and someone mentioned earlier about asking people that you know that you respect, because people aren't going to refer someone that they really don't believe is a good employee. So just asking people that you know and passing that word. Lots of people have referred fantastic folks. Jobs, when I used to work in corporations and things like that, almost every job I got was because somebody told somebody who contacted me. So it
Mhm.
was like, oh yeah, I know this girl, and this is her name. And that headhunter would contact me. I never was looking for jobs. Most of the jobs I got, I was never looking for. People sent me emails or contacted me by phone and told me about it just because of referrals.
Mhm. Yeah. All right. So before we get to our Q&A, I want to do a kind of go around the table and ask for each of our panelists to share your parting words of wisdom, so to speak, when it comes to hiring one's first employees. So Tracy, we'll start with you.
I would
And
say, considering everything that we discussed tonight, to first make the determination, are you ready to be an employer? Are you ready to hire someone? Because this is a big risk that you're taking. So make sure that you are sure about taking on that responsibility and determining whether you want to have an employee or a 1099 for a while until you can get your feet wet a little bit. So that's what I would suggest.
thanks, Tracy. All right, Renee, your parting words of wisdom.
Um, uh, I would make a checklist of everything you need to do with respect to an employee, and have a calendar, and have everything calendared out. And the main reason is it'll provide you comfort, because when it's the middle of the night and you wake up and you're like, oh wait, did I have them fill up the W-4? If you made a checklist, then on your checklist you would have checked that off, and in the middle of the night when you wake up, you'd say, of course I did, because it was on my checklist and I did it. So that would be my one piece of advice to take away:
I
checklist
love
and
it.
calendar invites.
Yeah, I am a big checklist person, so that is A plus advice in my book. All right, Marcia, your parting words of wisdom.
Yeah, listen, it's scary to hire a person. It is. I was scared to death about it, but there's so many great resources out there that are free, and all you have to do is say, how do you hire your first person? What kind of forms do you need? Download that stuff instead of figuring out, okay, what do I need? Because it can be overwhelming. So the checklist is definite. Number two is making sure that you're clear about expectations. Number three is make sure you budget for it. Okay. It's almost like opening up that credit card bill you don't want to look at. You still eventually have to understand what's in it. And it's the same thing as hiring a person, because now that person is reliant on you to pay that salary. So you want to make sure that you really understand how much service or how much business you have to bring in to keep that maintained. And it's not just salary, it's all the insurances that go with it. So really make sure that you budget for all of that. Someone sits down with you and have that real heart to heart with yourself. Can I afford this? If you can't, maybe a 1099 is the way to go, but be very clear about the agreement. They sign off on it, the expectations and all too. It's a different kind of mentality of somebody at a 1099 versus a W-2, but really figure out what you're looking at. It's not just an immediate response. It's basically what's the next 12, 16, 24 months look like with this person.
Because
Great.
I look at hiring someone as adopting a child. Like, this person is going to be relying on you. You have to make sure that it eats. You have to make sure that it's comfortable and you meet all their safety requirements and everything. So it's a lot to, consider when you want to hire your first employee. So yes, please give it a lot of thought and think it out. And like when they say, make your checklist and all that stuff like that to make sure that you have everything covered.
And I also have just a couple of quickie things. We always think about the things that we're required to do, but we also have to think about what's going to happen when that employee comes on board. Is there training going to be involved? Are you going to have any documentation for them to follow? Are there going to be policies and procedures that they need to follow? Are they developed? Is there any kind of an employee handbook for them to look at? What training is going to be necessary down the road? Is it just initially, or is there continuous training that you need? So it depends on the type of job you have them doing. You have to think about how you're going to be supporting that employee once they're on board.
Yeah, and going back to that, Melanie, too, the thing about payroll, people don't realize, like, automatically think of payroll. You can do payroll once a month, you can do it twice a month, you can do it bi-weekly. You're going to have to figure out what you can do, what you won't want to do. Now it's cheaper to do it monthly because they're going to charge you per each check, per each, basically application for that. So you want to really think that out, what you can afford. My first time when I had an employee, we paid them monthly. And everybody back in 2008 was 2010 was okay with it because it was a rough economy. Nowadays, I'm not so sure that would fly, but you have to make sure that there's an even there because it is expensive to do it bi-weekly versus bi-monthly versus monthly.
And
The
you have to
employees need to
also
know
keep
that.
in mind that,
Yeah.
and they also keep in mind what your state law says, because depending on what state you in, you have to run your payroll weekly or bi-weekly or whatever. So make sure you know what state requirements require you to run, how often you run the frequency of your payroll. Because I know in New York, you have to run it weekly if you're a private company.
Oh, wow. Important information to have for sure. Melanie, did you have any last final words of wisdom?
Yeah, basically that was it. Just really thinking about that I've seen a lot of people, they've hired people, but they weren't really prepared. They had a job description, but then it's changing all the time and they really don't know, and the person doesn't know what they're supposed to be doing. So it's really, really important to have those internal policies and procedures and to have a plan for those employees and make sure that they understand what the expectations are. And again, when you're talking about payroll, they need to go in understanding how often they're going to get paid. Because if they're coming in thinking they're getting paid weekly and they're getting paid monthly, that could be a serious problem for them.
Mhm. All right. Okay. Thank you all. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording of this, and then we can move into the question and answer session.